Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the El Porvenir Wash Process El Salvador from Madcap Coffee Roasters. And there's the bag right there. And Madcap, based out of Grand Rapids, Michigan, and this coffee was featured in our most recent blind taste test rankings video where it finished third place out of 4 Madcap coffees on that day. We didn't discuss those coffees too much in depth in that video, so this gives us an opportunity to discuss them a little further. Now, I very much enjoy reviewing wash-processed Kenyan coffees. That Ethiopian very much sounded like my flavor profile sort of coffee, and the Rwandan was pretty interesting just because it was a natural processed, and we hadn't reviewed a natural processed Rwandan on this channel before. However, with all that being said, if I had my pick of only trying one of these bags of coffee and reviewing one of these bags of coffee, it actually would have been this El Salvador right here, because I very much have a soft spot for these Central American coffees with these pie-like flavor note characteristics to them, as evident by the Santa Lucia by Manhattan last year, which was probably one of the more underrated coffees that we did review last year. I very much enjoyed discussing them, so this is the coffee I'm probably looking forward to discussing the most from this Madcap series. This right here is day 22 of this coffee. And Madcap doesn't have a brew guide for the V60. They do have one for a Kalita, which is a 16.9 to 1 water to coffee ratio, and it doesn't have a temperature on there, but I'm assuming with the Chemex recipe that they have, 208 degrees Fahrenheit, that's probably what they would use for as well. So with that being said, standard recipe on this one right here, 16 to 1 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 205 degrees Fahrenheit. And I like this one better through the V60. This right here is brewed through the AeroPress, as I'm going to brew all 4 of these coffees on the final brew with the AeroPress just to see if we might get something a little different. Madcap, of course, is a light medium American for the roast profile. And with all of that out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. So day 6, which was that blind taste test rankings day, and the coffee performed up to expectations. Truth be told, I fully expected that one to finish 2nd place and possibly even 1st place. But with that being said, 3rd place isn't a bad finish given just how much I enjoyed the other 2 cups of coffee on that table, as this one was super sweet and sugary in the finish. And that's exactly what I was expecting, and that's exactly what I got from this cup of coffee, and it made it super easy to pick out from that lineup. But in addition to that, the most dominant trait that we were experiencing was a pretty robust apple acidity that was coming from the cup of coffee. Again, was fully expecting this kind of pie-like cup of coffee in general, so it left a pretty positive first impression, even if it did finish 3rd place. Day 8 ran it through the Chemex, and it's really nice, but still not quite as good in the Chemex. And that's mostly why we settled on the V60, and here's kind of an exact reason for that. When brewed through the Chemex, I get a lot more of the apple acidity. And while obviously that's what I'm going for in this cup of coffee, it was in trade-off for the really nice sweetness that we were experiencing from the V60. So the trade-off for apple acidity and sweetness, not necessarily something that I prefer. So as a result, I just liked the V60 a little better for this coffee. Day 10 went with Madcap's recipe, and I can't help but emphasize that this cup of coffee is ridiculously apple-like. So it's one of the most apple-like cups of coffee that we've ever reviewed on this channel, so definitely keep that in mind. But we have seen dramatic improvement even at the higher temperatures, as it's still yielding just a wonderful bit of sweetness in the cup in general. Not too surprising. Day 12 ran the coffee through the Chemex with Madcap's recipe this time, and we were getting a little bit better of an experience through the V60, which we've already kind of highlighted and emphasized. It's a bit more robust in the sense that it's bringing out a lot more of that apple acidity, and as mentioned, that's the big trade-off that you're experiencing here. Not necessarily a pleasant trade-off for me, but can feel plenty of the darker sweetness as a secondary characteristic to this cup of coffee. That's the brown sugar, and if I had to describe the caramel on here, as I often like to describe, there's a lighter and a darker caramel, and this feels like a little bit more of a darker caramel to this cup of coffee. Day 15 can't help but continue to emphasize the kind of tanginess of the apple in here, and that's something that we haven't discussed too much, but the apple in here is actually a little bit more tangy. It's a little bit more zesty than I think I've experienced from so many other cups of coffee. So that stands out on its own for this coffee, and it's both a little tart, a little sour, and it nicely complements the fair bit of dark sweetness in the finish. Can even find a little bit of bitter cacao and a bit of the cookie-like sweetness in the finish. So you're getting a lot of things. So far what I've experienced from these Madcap coffees is they're not one-dimensional by any means. They do have a lot of complexity and depth to them, which is always going to be a selling point to me. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. And we have 4 level 4s, so let's run through those real quick. By the way, I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of this coffee through the AirPress. I still think the V60 was better. But yeah, 5 level 4s actually. So sweetness, finish, and cleanliness all at a level 4. A pretty clean cup of coffee, not too surprising. We've been harping on the sweetness a lot. Definitely they're justified at that level 4. Definitely sweeter than what I was experiencing from the Kenyan coffee. And the finish, level 4, That seems about perfect. It doesn't have one of those eternal finishes. It's got a very nice sugary sweet finish, which always is what I was expecting. Caramel level 4, yeah, very much pronounced, very prominent in this cup of coffee. Haven't discussed it too much, but just right up there in abundance with the sugary sweetness that's coming from it as well. As mentioned, a lot of this kind of darker caramel to it. And then the citrus fruit, because the apple only really kind of lumps into one of those fruit categories, and we always have to kind of put in that citrus part. Level 4, yeah, definitely think that that's justified, and that's going to be kind of fun when we discuss the Rwandan coffee as well. Body level 3, that's not too surprising. It has a very nice body to it. I think that's a really big selling point. One of the more underrated aspects of this coffee is a really good body, especially with the V60. Acidity, we were mentioning, a little higher. That's kind of what I've experienced from these Madcap coffees, is that they can be a little higher on the acidity, which is a little interesting to me because I have been kind of out of the Madcap game for a while. As a coffee roaster, I used to drink very often, very regularly. I kind of forgot that they might be a little bit more acidic than I remember from time to time. But anything else really worth noting on here? There's a fair bit of chocolate, actually. I think I kind of mentioned that while we were going through the notes. But for the most part, yeah, nothing else. I think we've touched on the important things. And yeah, I don't really disagree with anything on this tasting wheel. I think this is a pretty good representation of this coffee. All right, my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. I think it lived up to all the expectations that I had for it going into it. It was my third favorite coffee. It probably ended up being either my second favorite or my third favorite. I actually have a hard time distinguishing whether or not I like this one or the Kenyan more, but I think by the end of the day, this is a cup of coffee that I would probably have enjoyed drinking more often for a longer amount of time than that Kenyan coffee. So I think this was a nice cup of coffee. As mentioned, I do have a soft spot for these coffees in general, and this kind of fun apple tanginess that was coming from this cup of coffee did set it apart enough from a lot of the other Central American coffees that made it a lot more fun, a little bit more complexity and depth, so another testament to how much I'm enjoying these Madcap coffees. Type of person I would suggest this coffee to. If you're like me, you like these clean, washed Central American coffees with these pie-like characteristics to it, most notably a lot of apple components coming from it, this is a pretty nice fit for you. I thought it was really well done in general, but I've been kind of discussing that throughout this video, so I think I'll leave this review at that. If you by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, would love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. And this right here has been a review of the El Porvenir Wash Process El Salvador from Madcap Coffee Roasters. Thank you for watching.